IGN is the internet's favorite punching bag. Many people have clowned on this website for its reviews, from Too Much Water, to the endless nines given to Call of Duty games, to this Alien Isolation review that everyone hates. But I have a confession. For someone who disagrees so strongly with the way this website reviews stuff, I read a lot of IGN reviews. Whenever a new movie comes out, I sprint to the IGN website like,
"Ugh, this ought to be good."
And the truth is, the individual reviews on IGN are not bad. I like a lot of their reviewers. Siddhanta Laka always has pretty nuanced takes on movies, even if I disagree about half the time. Katie Reif is a really good writer. Her stuff for Letterboxd actually is usually even better. Truly, I like a lot of the individual reviewers for IGN, even though all of them have to adopt the weird IGN cadence at the end of all of their video reviews.
It truly is a classic throwback longtime series fans have been clamoring for. Sonic Mania is a stellar example of a retro revival done right.
They're always so normal until they get to the verdict, and then they have to shift into IGN mode.
I am left feeling so torn.
But that's not my issue with IGN. The problem I have with IGN is the little number that shows up at the end of every review, because the way IGN assigns its scores makes no sense. It's a running joke on the internet now that IGN is incapable of giving most major releases anything less than a 6, and most of the time they just slap a boilerplate 7 on everything, regardless of whether that thing is Jackass 4.5, Chippendale Rescue Rangers, or a clump of unfinished CGI. Oh, you're a Phase 4 Marvel sequel? I diagnose you with 7. IGN used to review on a 100-point scale, but in 2020 they actually switched to a 10-point scale. And when they did, they put out an entire article talking about their review philosophy. So I think it's worth taking a minute here to actually break down IGN's rationale behind their scores. Art criticism isn't a science. You cannot objectively measure how good or fun a game or movie or TV show or comic book is in the same way that you can quantify things like temperature or mass or speed. The goal of art is to inspire an emotional reaction in its audience. Therefore, what we're doing in reviews is talking about how a given work affects us emotionally when we watch it or read it or play it, and the review is the inherently subjective perspective of an individual critic. Scores are not math, they're code, with each number corresponding to a description on our scale. I legitimately agree 100% with everything they just said, especially those last two things. Review scores are just a code. The numbers are just stand-ins for how a reviewer feels about a piece of art. They're just associations, but like any code, it only works if those associations are applied with a consistent meaning. And the problem with IGN's review system is that they aren't. I went through IGN's review index and gathered data on their movie review scores for the last 10 years, and what you find is that every year, at least half of their scores are 7s or higher. What's even crazier to me is that there are several years where 3/4 of their scores are 6s or higher. IGN, that means you chose to review on a scale of 1 to 10, but 3/4 of your stuff ends up here. You're not even using the back half of your scale at all. IGN has not given a movie a 1 since 2017. And this isn't just a problem with their movie reviews. For games, it might actually be worse. In 2019, 90% of IGN's game reviews were 6s or higher. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, I say, you already having fallen asleep. Dan Stapleton, the head of reviews at IGN, actually writes a column about reviewing and the philosophy of reviews, which to a big old nerd like me is whacking material. Apparently Dan Stapleton got wind of the fact that the entire internet pretty much expects IGN to throw out 7s like I throw out backslashes when I play Shulk, so he wrote a whole piece talking about why so few IGN reviews even use the bottom half of the scale, and it's pretty revealing actually. He starts by saying, "There's no greater waste of everybody's time and effort than telling people that something they've never heard of isn't good. Seems like a personal diss, Dan, and I don't appreciate it." But then he gets to the point. Why is it that the big name stuff rarely seems to score below a 7, which means good on IGN's review scale? Simply put, if something doesn't at least look like it might be great, you probably weren't paying attention to it in the first place. But if it does look great enough to pique your interest, it usually ends up being at least okay. Does it though? This is basically Dan's overarching point, that IGN has limited resources and has to decide strategically what to review, which leads them to review the biggest name stuff that will capture the most eyes, and that the big name game and movie studios have to be feeling pretty confident about their stuff being reasonably well received for them to make it to the point of being released at all. Dan thinks it's relatively rare that so much time and money is spent on creating something that falls short of being at least okay, if not good, great, or even amazing, which is why the great majority of our reviews end up on the top half of the scale. When it comes to the big events, they're usually safe bets, and in most cases the question isn't if they'll be good, but how good they'll be. Yeah, but is it though? Because I've seen pretty much every major theatrical release this year, and I can tell you for a fact that is not the case. Argyle had a $200 million budget and was directed by the guy who made the Kingsman movies and was really bad, although Samuel L. Jackson put his entire left ball into this movie. Madame Web had a $100 million budget and was released by Sony, and it got memed into oblivion 2 seconds after the first trailer came out. Borderlands had a $120 million budget, and the fucking no-effort Watch Mojo video is legitimately better.
So, you want to hear another story, huh?
God, I hate this planet.
And what's your story, young lady?
Destiny awaits.
This'll just take a second.
Honestly, the experience of watching them is pretty much the same. A famous person shows up on your screen and you go, oh, that's them. And then the plot of the movie that's going on in the background of that Watch Mojo video is the famous people walking around just rattling off millennial lines like, so that just happened. So I call bullshit on the claim that big releases are just too high profile to be bad. Now, what I'm about to do should never be tried at home. Let's go to the IGN comments section.
I'm going to need a gun.
People actually had some good points to make down here, and to his credit, Dan was actively discussing with them. You would think by this point he would know never to come down here, but maybe he's just desensitized at this point. This guy is like, why do you even use the 1 to 10 scale when you just said you don't even use the bottom of it? And Dan says, well, if we started saying that anything that's currently a 7 is now a 4, people would be extremely confused and think we were calling things bad when we meant that they were good. First of all, that's not even the point that this dude or I am making right now. I'm not saying you should call everything that's currently a 7 a 4. I'm saying you call fucking everything a 7. Call things that are a 7, and then when something's a 4, call it a 4. It's not going to be confusing to people to see movies scored accurately. And if there is confusion over that, isn't that a function of the fact that you only gave like 5% of your movies 4s? You've redefined that number to mean the bottom 5% of movies. So fucking of course people are going to think it's bad. People associate numerical scores with how they were graded in school, and you can't reprogram everyone's brain to suddenly see a number differently. 2 things about this. First of all, you kind of can by changing what that number is associated with, which you would do by not giving the worst 5% of your movies a fucking 4 out of 10. Second, if your scale is based off of the scores people got in school, how the fuck are you calling a 7 good? That's a C-. They don't make bumper stickers that say, my kid is a C student at Oak Valley Middle School. The problem with the scale being this asymmetrical is that it brushes off all bad movies or games as equally bad. Last year, IGN gave 4 movies 3s and 0 1s or 2s. So the only real scores to express badness on IGN's scale were 4s and 5s, which made up only about a quarter of IGN's scores. But here are some movies that all scored a 5 this year. Maxine, Despicable Me 4, and Madame Web. I don't see how you can watch Maxine, a movie that has an interesting premise, great acting, stylish, 80s inspired visuals, but that ultimately doesn't really pay any of it off in a super satisfying way, and say, yes, this is the same as Despicable Me 4, where this guy creates superhero minions and where the villain is a cockroach-obsessed Will Ferrell trying to do a French accent whose motive is that Gru stole his act in the middle school talent show. And then on top of that, you watch fucking Madame Web and say, yes, this is of equal quality to both those other movies.
No, we could help so many people.
I'm not interested in helping people. No one helped me when my family was starving.
Ah yes, quality film. IGN defends this approach in multiple articles by sort of hand-waving and saying, well, the bottom half of the scale just means it isn't worth your time. But if you're gonna review bad stuff, it's actually important to be honest about how bad the stuff is. Because not all stuff that falls under the umbrella bad is equally bad. And like IGN says, review scores are a code. By throwing Madame Web in with Maxine, you're diluting the communicative power of that code. And that leads directly into the second, much more important problem. By clumping all your scores in the top half of your scale, you're losing a lot of your ability to talk about actually good movies. Because just like not all bad movies are bad to the same degree, there's a huge range of quality in good movies, and your scale should be set up to reflect that. By top-loading the scale, you diminish the impact of giving something a 7 or an 8 or a 9. And here's where I'm going to take a bit of a turn and tell you a little bit about how I score movies. This is a histogram of movie scores for the 242 movies I've scored since the beginning of 2023. It's not perfectly symmetrical, but I'd say that's a pretty accurate distribution of scores. And that's because on my scale, each of the 11 point values from 0 to 10 actually has a distinct meaning. We're gonna start in the middle. 4 to 6 is the range for average movies. A 4 is not the worst thing you've ever seen. Pi is a 4 because it had an amazing setup that went absolutely nowhere. Not Another Church Movie was an out of nowhere 4 in that it had total amateur production value, but it made me laugh a surprising number of times. A 4 can be a dull, unremarkable movie, or a movie with a promising setup that had big flaws, or even a super flawed movie that had 1 or 2 really good aspects. There's a lot of ways to add up to a 4, and believe me, there's worse things than a 4. 5s usually have at least one truly enjoyable aspect, even if the overall movie isn't that remarkable. The Watchers is a good example of a 5. The visual style and overall vibe of this movie is like spot on, and the setup is really good, but the story just peters out. It just goes nowhere. Arcadian is another great example. The horror elements of this movie are super well done, and there were a couple of sequences that really skeeved me out. The creature effects, I don't even want to fucking know what these things are. But again, story went nowhere. I feel like 5s are usually the most disappointing, weirdly, because they usually mean missed opportunities. 6s are the first purely enjoyable score. These are the movies that are fully enjoyable the first time you see them, and they just kind of fade to the back of your memory. They're not standout hits, but they're a fun experience in the moment. Immaculate was a fun 6. That ending sequence is so fucking intense, and I loved the experience of sinking into the story of this movie, even if I didn't love the rest of the horror elements. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is also a good 6. Liked it, it just didn't cross that threshold into great movie. To me, a 7 is like a movie that really works. It might not be something I think about for the rest of my life, but it was entirely enjoyable and delivered a memorable emotional or intellectual experience. The Bike Riders was a solid 7. Fascinating story, interesting themes, and great acting. Do I still think about the Bike Riders? Not really, but it was more polished than a 6. An 8 is where you cross that line into movies that will stick with you for a long time. The Grand Budapest Hotel is an 8. I love so much about that movie, from the camera work to the story to the whimsical style it's told in. The frame narrative is such an interesting addition that adds a lot of intrigue to the beginning and nostalgia and sadness to the end. See, the higher we go on this scale, the more I just want to start rambling about how much I love these movies. A lot of 8s have a few scenes or aspects that just pop into my head at random times long after I've seen them. Sometimes I'll just be doing something and then I'll randomly think about the scene in Inglourious Basterds where they're all sitting in the bar and they've got guns pointed at each other under the table, and I'll sink back into the tension that scene builds. And then I'll remember, hey, I'm supposed to be doing the dishes. Why are my hands all clenched and sweaty? That's the best way I can describe an 8. 8s and above are extremely rare on my scale. They're things to be cherished when you find them. What's a lot easier to find are 2s and 3s. 3s are like the boring bin. Night Swim, Argyle, Abigail, Harold and the Purple Crayon. These are movies I didn't outright hate, but had no ounce of creativity or intrigue. A 3 is typically the worst kind of movie to have to sit through because you're just bored as fuck waiting for the thing to be over. You kind of just feel nothing. A 2 is where you get the kind of infuriatingly bad movie where you walk out of the theater just confused and angry, like, huh? What the fuck? Tarot. Somebody wrote, filmed, and edited this and released it, and they were okay with this. Quantumania, where you're like, whoa, how the fuck did something this bad even come into existence? These are 2s. Now, what I'm gonna say might sound paradoxical, but hear me out. The only thing worse than a 2 is a 0. Zeros are legitimately not even movies. If something gets a 0, that's because that's how much effort went into making the movie. 1313 Giant Killer Bees is a 0, although I did give it a quarter point for cinematography because whoever filmed/edited this shower scene, probably the same guy, at least had the artistic foresight to spare my eyes at the last possible second. Seriously, look how close this movie comes to showing you something life-changingly horrifying. You're 1 pixel away from permanent vision damage. The reason I say a 0 is the only thing worse than a 2 is because a 1 is a truly entertaining kind of movie. There is this uncanny valley between actual dog shit and no effort snooze fest that I like to call the funny zone. If you've watched any other videos on this channel, you know I like bad movies. Madame Web, Inspector Gadget, Beverly Hills Chihuahua 2. These are the kind of cinematic achievements that fall under the score of a 1. A 1 is like the perfect cocktail of terrible acting, terrible visuals, and a thoroughly nonsensical plot that hits just right on a day where I wake up and go, today I want to make fun of something bad. 9s are the all-timers, the ones I think about so much I have to rewatch them over and over and over. A 9 is the point at which a movie doesn't have any major flaws. But But that doesn't mean that 9s are perfect movies. A lot of my favorite movies still have aspects that don't sit quite right. Ryan Gosling can't sing well enough to back up his acting in La La Land, but that movie is still a masterpiece, and the first time I saw and heard the epilogue sequence, I burst into tears. I think the last hour of Amadeus drags on a little bit, but I cannot stop re-watching YouTube clips from Amadeus because I'm obsessed with the way Salieri is both amazed and disgusted when he sees Mozart's sheet music. The way he can't even bear to fucking look at them anymore because they're so perfect and they just fall out of his arms. It's just, it's such a great way of using his face to show us exactly how he's feeling. There are a lot of 9s that I can't even really express any real critiques of, like Django. I fucking love this movie and I couldn't tell you anything that's wrong with it, but it's still a 9. And I feel like for a while I was like, so how come those aren't 10s? But that's not what a 10 is. A 10 is the overlap of the incredible filmmaking craftsmanship of a 9 with the concepts and ideas that fascinate you the most. A 10 is something that permanently imprints on you, something that captures every facet of what you love about movies. That's why it's important not to call everything a 10. When you overuse it as a score, you cheapen its significance because a 10 is supposed to say something about you as a reviewer. It all comes back to the idea of scores as a code, as a stand-in for an emotional reaction to something. When 10s represent the movies that speak to you the most on an intellectual and emotional level instead of just movies that were really good, you get to set your goalposts as a reviewer in a really personal and revealing way. I think 10s tell the people reading or watching your stuff the most about what you value as a critic. I have 4 10s. I might have been predisposed to liking Everything Everywhere All at Once, not just because it has great fight scenes, which are always a plus for me, but because it explores the relationship between first and second generation immigrants in a way that's fascinating to me. My parents are first generation immigrants, and I have a lot of respect for the values they instilled in my brother and me, and I know that the preservation of those values into the next generation is something they care about a lot. I think a lot of immigrant parents worry about their children falling away from tradition and discipline. The same is true of the immigrant family in Everything Everywhere All at Once, but in their family it's much more of a negative influence. Evelyn is constantly worried about Joy making her look bad, about keeping up appearances in front of her father, trying to project the image of the daughter he wants her to be. At the beginning of this movie, Evelyn feels like a failure and a mess because she can't be the version of herself that would finally make Gong Gong proud, but that mindset puts a huge strain on her relationship with Joy. When Evelyn leans so heavily on some of the traditional mindsets of their immigrant heritage, when she refuses to see how they're actually making her feel worse about herself as a person, she pushes Joy further into nihilism. Weirdly, the incessant focus on the decline of the younger generation's values and the constant effort to claw them away from the perceived edge of mental corruption pushes them further and further towards that edge. For a movie that deals with such personal and heavy topics, it's absolutely absurd. But that absurdity is not just a stylistic choice, it's the central theme of the movie, and it lets the movie engage all of your emotions. One minute you're like, haha, Evelyn just said Rakakuni. The next minute, if only we could have done laundry, Evelyn. It is rare that a movie lives up to the VeggieTales promise.
I laughed, I cried, it moved me, Bob.
The Social Network is the most unique and intricate biopic I've ever seen. They could have just gone the typical biopic route and given us a real underdog story about a guy who defied all the rules and faced all the odds to make this new thing that we all use now. But instead, the movie is more interested in dissecting Mark Zuckerberg. What parts of himself led him to create something like Facebook? Who did he screw over to get where he got? Was Justin Timberlake in the mix? These are the questions The Social Network wants to explore. It is at its core an examination of ideas, the people who come up with them, the people who try to leech off of them, and the people who get left out of them. The Dark Knight is a movie where every time I watch it, it's like, oh, this scene is fucking awesome. Oh, this scene is fucking awesome. Oh, this scene is fucking awesome. And then you reach the end of the movie because every scene is fucking awesome. It has this incredible momentum that propels the story from scene to scene to the point that even scenes of characters just standing around talking feel so intense and impactful. It's a super entertaining action movie, but at the same time, it finds time to talk about terrorism, government surveillance, political corruption, and tangerines. It's a visual masterpiece with an incredible story and a phenomenal soundtrack to back it all up. It's not just the best superhero movie of all time. The Dark Knight is the emotional bar that every action movie is trying to live up to. Dreams have always been a point of fascination for me. When I was a freshman in high school, I watched The Matrix for the first time and went down this giant rabbit hole about lucid dreams, and since then it's been a fixation of mine. Christopher Nolan shares that fixation. He talks about how when he was at boarding school, he would take afternoon naps that would frequently become lucid dreams. That experience planted an idea in his mind, a horror movie about dream stealers, and the seed of that idea would grow and evolve over the course of his filmmaking career into Inception. The world building this movie has to do in the first act is crazy. Most of the first half of this movie is just Cobb expositing about how everything works, but the concept of building these dreams is so interesting, it's legitimately just enjoyable having it all explained. I love the way this movie is ostensibly about the task of planting an idea in Fisher's mind, but the further into his mind they go, the more we learn about Cobb. The whole heist in Fisher's mind is intended to link the idea that they want to plant with an emotional catharsis, but Cobb ends up getting that catharsis too. The reveals are so cleverly structured and laid out that the emotional apex of Fisher's story lines up perfectly with Cobb's final admission of guilt. It's also a look into the mind of the director himself. You can see how much the filmmaking process informs the preparation and structure of the heist, and because of that, Inception manages to be both the highly entertaining blockbuster and a fascinating examination of the pieces of ourselves that bleed into the things that we create. Those are my 10s so far. The reason I watch so many random movies is the off chance of finding another one of those. And I'm sure as time goes on, I'll find more and more. But those 4 sit on a level above everything else I've seen. And the consequence of a scale like IGN's that clumps all its good stuff together into the 3 or 4 highest scores is that you lose the ability to differentiate between good and life-changing masterpiece. A long time ago, I made this John Wick 4 review. And even now, I'm pretty happy with the points I made about the movie and with the score that I gave it. 6.5. Super enjoyable, if not long-lastingly memorable. Don't think I didn't like this movie. It made my best of 2023 list last year. But I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that John Wick 4 completely redefined my understanding of movie making. But my comments just fucking exploded, dude. People fucking started piling on and disliking the video, claiming this was a 10 out of 10 movie and I just didn't know what I was talking about. You know who else gave this movie a 10? IGN. You know what else they gave a 10 in the same year? This. Now, first of all, I don't think either of these movies are 10s. And again, I liked both of these movies, but I will not hear you say these movies should be given the same score. These movies are not the same quality in my mind, and yet when 10 just means real good, that's what happens. The 10 that you claimed was going to serve as a code now tells me nothing. Now, what's interesting about this specific example is that these 2 reviews were written by 2 different people. Siddhant Adlakha reviewed Oppenheimer. In the past 2 years, he's reviewed like 80 movies for IGN. He's one of their most active movie reviewers. Tom Jorgensen reviewed John Wick 4, but he's only reviewed like 20 movies for IGN in the last 2 years. And yet both of these reviewers are somehow the definitive voices behind IGN's stance on these movies. And that leads us into the second main problem with IGN's review system, the random reviewers sprinkled in. Think all the way back to like 7 hours ago when we read IGN's review philosophy. They were emphatic that the review scores are the subjective perspective of the individual critic. But IGN is not an individual critic. It's an amalgam of several individuals all writing under the shared pseudonym IGN. And that really undermines the consistency of IGN's scores. Because some of the reviewers like Siddhant Adlakha and Matt Donato have reviewed like 80 movies for IGN in the last couple years, but there are many smaller reviewers who have reviewed less than 5. I'm not saying IGN shouldn't hire new reviewers or give smaller reviewers a chance or anything like that. Obviously, every reviewer on the platform started from somewhere. But giving these smaller reviewers who only review 1 or 2 or 3 movies the same legitimacy for your brand as reviewers who have reviewed 80 movies dilutes the meaning of that brand because all of them have different tastes. All of them have different flavors as reviewers. If IGN's scoring system is a recipe, that recipe calls for 2 cups of Siddhant, a pound of Matt, 2 tablespoons of Katie Reif and AA Dowd, and just a pinch of Eric and Jesse and Rafa and Chase and Ryan and Robert and Lex and Kenneth and Lena and Carlos and Jared and Devin and just one single solitary grain of Luke, because this man usually reviews video games, but somehow got handed the task of reviewing Beverly Hills Cop. That shit is coming out of the oven looking like this. I think a super easy solution to this is to have these histograms at the bottom of each review. Oh, Katie Reif gave this a 7? Okay, so this is probably a pretty average movie given her score distribution. Carlos Aguilar gave this movie an 8. Well, he's reviewed like 3 movies, so I don't even know what an 8 means to him. I'll have to take that score with a grain of salt and actually read the review to figure out what he liked about it and get a better sense of what an 8 means to him. Oh, Rafael Montemayor said this was a 9? So it is in fact a movie. The problem is that IGN wants to have it both ways. They want to have a bunch of different reviewers each grabbing the stuff that they want to review, but they also want the authoritative effect of having the scores assigned to the website as a whole instead of individuals as reviewers. And that's not just me saying that. IGN explicitly states that they want 10 out of 10 IGN to be a recognizable part of their brand. But guys, and I didn't want to be the one to have to to break this to you, that's not your brand at this point. Your brand at this point is 7 out of 10 IGN, because that's what you're fucking handing out like Halloween candy. Now I have to reiterate that I do not recommend reading the comments on any IGN reviews, but every time they hand out a 7, people are like, hey, exactly what we expected. So what's the verdict on IGN? Oh wait, hold on, I gotta shift into my IGN persona. On its face, IGN's scoring system seems to provide a great way to grade pieces of art, but the combination of multiple reviewers with a scale that doesn't even give meaning to half the numbers leads to a bloated, meaningless collection of scores that left this reviewer feeling IG-angry. 7 out of 10.